Before we get into this one, I need to ask you something. Have you ever looked at a map and noticed a gap? A place where the trail lines just stop, where the contour lines bunch together and there's nothing marked? Not a lake, not a cliff, just nothing? Like the cartographer's pen lifted and never came back down? Leave a comment if you have. And if you're new here, subscribe. I mean that, because a few weeks ago a park ranger in Arkansas sent me a file, scanned pages from a logbook that should have been destroyed in 1974, along with a recorded statement he made on his phone at 2 in the morning. He said he was sending it to me because the Forest Service wouldn't listen. The county sheriff thought he was having a breakdown, and he needed someone to put it somewhere it couldn't be quietly filed away. This is his account. My name is Andy Marsh. I'm 41 years old, and I've been a park ranger with the United States Forest Service for 15 years. Before that, I was a paramedic in Little Rock for 3 years, and before that, I was a combat medic with the 101st Airborne, 2 deployments to Afghanistan. I've held a man's femoral artery shut with my thumb while a helicopter was still 9 minutes out. I've performed CPR on a 6-year-old in the back of an ambulance crossing a bridge at 70 miles an hour. I'm telling you this not to impress you, but because I need you to understand that I don't scare easy, and I don't make up stories, and I know the difference between a man having a mental health crisis and something that doesn't have a category in any field manual I've ever read. For the last 7 years, I've been stationed at the Bald Ridge Ranger Station in the Ozarks St. Francis National Forest, about 40 miles south of the Missouri line. If you've been there, you know it's beautiful. Old-growth hardwoods so thick the canopy blocks out the sun by mid-morning, limestone bluffs that drop straight into creek bottoms, cave systems that haven't been fully mapped. The Forest Service has been trying to map those caves since the 1960s. They keep sending survey teams in. The surveys keep coming back incomplete. Nobody talks about why. I need to tell you what happened last week, but to make sense of it, I need to go back to my first day at Bald Ridge, because that's when I was given the rules. I reported for duty on March 3, 2017. My supervisor was a man named Dale Coburn, 58 years old, built like a fence post, skin like leather that had been left out in the rain and dried in the sun about 10,000 times. Dale had been at Bald Ridge for 26 years. He'd started as seasonal staff in 1991 and never left, never transferred, never promoted, never applied for anything else. In a system that moves people around like chess pieces, Dale had been sitting on the same square for over a quarter century. At the time, I thought that was admirable. Dedication, love of place. I understand now that he couldn't leave. Dale drove me out to the station in his own truck because the service road was washed out and the government vehicles didn't have the clearance. We bounced along a logging road for 45 minutes without talking. Dale wasn't a talker. He communicated through silences of varying lengths and the occasional grunt that could mean anything from "good morning" to "there's a timber rattler 2 feet from your left boot." About 30 minutes in, when we crossed a concrete ford over Stillwater Creek, he pulled the truck over, killed the engine, and sat there looking at the dashboard for a long time. Then he reached into the glove box and took out a piece of paper. It was folded into quarters, soft at the creases like it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. The paper was yellow. Not with age, it was literally yellow legal paper, the kind you get at any office supply store. But the writing on it was old. Different handwriting and different inks, some entries in pencil so faded you could barely read them. Dale handed it to me and said, "Read this." I unfolded it and read. 1. Do not attempt to locate the hollow trail. It is not on any current map. If you find it anyway, turn around immediately. Do not follow it to its end. 2. If a hiker reports hearing someone calling for help in the western hollows after sundown, file a report. Do not investigate. Do not send a search team. Mark the report with a red triangle in the upper right corner. 3. Between October 15th and March 1st, do not enter the forest alone after 4 p.m. Between March 2nd and October 14th, do not enter the forest alone after 8:30 p.m. These times are non-negotiable. 4. If trail cameras on the Stillwater grid capture images of figures that were not present during your patrol, replace the SD cards, file the images in the red binder in the station lockbox, and do not discuss them with anyone outside the station. 5. If a person emerges from the forest claiming to have been lost for longer than the time they were actually missing, or if their appearance does not match the expected duration of their absence, do not release them. Keep them at the station. Call Dale. If Dale is unavailable, call the number on the back of this paper. Do not call 911. Do not call the county sheriff. They are not equipped. 6. If you hear your name spoken by a voice you recognize, but the person who owns that voice is not scheduled to be in the field, do not respond. Do not follow the voice. Return to the station by the most direct route. If the voice follows you, do not increase your pace. Walk, do not run. 7. The old fire tower on Sycamore Ridge has been decommissioned since 1978. If you see a light in it at night, note the time and duration in your logbook. Do not approach the tower. Do not radio about the light. It is not a fire. I read the list twice. Then I looked at Dale. He was watching me the way you'd watch someone defuse a bomb. Patient, still, ready for it to go either way. Is this a hazing thing? I said. Dale didn't smile, didn't shift in his seat, didn't do anything except say, in a voice as flat as the paper in my hand, "Do I look like I'm hazing you?" He didn't. "These are real," he said. "They're not in any manual. They're not on any server. That piece of paper and the ones like it that came before are the only place they have ever been written down. The ranger who trained me gave me his copy in 1991. The one who trained him handed it down in 1978. The oldest entry on there, Rule Number 1, was written in 1973, the year they closed the trail." I asked the obvious question, why'd they close the trail? Dale started the truck, put it in gear, pulled back onto the logging road. He drove for about 2 minutes before he answered. 7 hikers went missing on the hollow trail between 1969 and 1973. All experienced, all in good weather, all on a well-marked path in a forest that doesn't have grizzlies or mountain lions or anything that should be able to take a healthy adult off a trail without leaving a trace. He downshifted for a hill. No bodies, no gear, no blood, no scraps of fabric, no signs of struggle. Nothing. Like they stepped off the trail and the forest closed behind them like water. People get lost in the woods, Dale. People get lost in the woods, he agreed, and search teams find them, or they find their remains, or they find something. In 7 cases over 4 years, they found nothing. Not a boot print, not a candy wrapper, nothing. He glanced at me. The ranger on duty in 73, a man named Bill Cotter, he went up the hollow trail the night after the 7th disappearance. He came back the next morning and called the district office and told them to close the trail permanently. They argued with him for about 10 minutes. Then they closed it, destroyed the trailhead, pulled the signs, removed it from every map the Forest Service published after September 1973. What did Cotter find up there? Dale was quiet for a long time. We turned onto the final approach to the station, a gravel track that wound through a stand of white oaks, so old they looked like they were holding up the sky. He never said. Wrote 1 entry in the station logbook that night and resigned the next morning. Moved to Tulsa. Died in 1994. His daughter donated his papers to the Forest Service, and someone in archives flagged the logbook page and sealed it. Sealed it? It's in the station, in the lockbox. I'll show it to you when you're ready. That was my introduction to Bald Ridge. Dale showed me the station, a 1960s-era cinderblock building with a newer addition bolted onto the back, solar panels on the roof, a radio tower, and a parking area that could hold 4 vehicles. Inside was a desk, a radio, a wall of topographic maps with certain areas outlined in red grease pencil, a gun safe, a first aid station, a small kitchen, 2 bunks, and the lockbox. The lockbox was a fireproof cabinet bolted to the floor in the back room. Dale had the only key, and he wore it on a cord around his neck. For the first 2 weeks, everything was normal. Aggressively, almost disappointingly normal. I ran patrols, I checked trail conditions, I helped a family from Missouri whose kid had twisted an ankle on the Rimrock Loop. I fixed a stretch of boardwalk over a wet meadow that had rotted through. I filed paperwork. Dale was patient, competent, and quiet. We ate dinner together most nights, canned soup, cornbread from a mix, coffee that could strip paint. He told stories about the forest, the way old farmers talk about their land, with love, but also with the kind of respect you give something that could kill you if you stopped paying attention. I noticed things, though, small things I filed away without fully processing. Dale checked his watch constantly, not nervously, methodically, every 15 or 20 minutes like he was monitoring a dosage. I assumed it was just a habit until I noticed it changed frequency. During the day, he checked casually. After about 3:30 in the afternoon, the interval tightened. By 4 p.m. in those early March days, he was checking every 5 minutes. And by sundown, he wasn't checking his watch anymore. He was checking the windows. The second thing, the western windows. The station had windows on all 4 sides, but the ones facing west, facing the deep forest, the terrain that climbed toward the ridgeline and the hollows beyond, had heavier curtains than the others. Not decorative, functional. Thick canvas like the blackout curtains I'd seen on military installations. Dale closed them every evening before sundown. Not some evenings, every evening. And once they were closed, he never opened them until morning. The third thing was the radio. We had a standard Forest Service radio setup, and it worked fine during the day. But between about midnight and 4 a.m., the radio would occasionally pick up interference, not static, something underneath static. It sounded, if I'm being honest, like breathing. Long, slow, patient breathing, as though someone was holding down a transmit button and just sitting there. The first time I heard it, I keyed the mic and said, "Station, this is Bald Ridge, you're transmitting. Please identify." The breathing stopped. Dale, who was in his bunk, said from the darkness, "Don't answer it when it does that." He said it the way you'd say, "Don't touch the stove." Not urgent, just factual. Rule of the house. I didn't answer the radio again. 2 weeks and 3 days into my posting, I had my first real experience. I'm going to describe it exactly as it happened, because the details matter, and because I've gone over this in my head enough times that I'm confident in my recall. It was March 19th, a Tuesday. I was running a solo afternoon patrol on the Rimrock Loop, an approved trail, well marked, 3 miles out and 3 miles back. Dale had cleared me for solo daytime patrols the previous week. The weather was clear, mid-50s, light wind from the south. I had my pack, my radio, my sidearm, which I carry for wildlife encounters, and a good 4 hours of daylight remaining. Everything was fine. At about the 2-mile marker, where the trail curves along a limestone shelf above the creek bottom, I heard something that made me stop walking. It was a man's voice, coming from the creek drainage below me and to the west. He was saying, "Hello? Can anybody hear me? I need help down here." The words were clear. The volume was appropriate for the distance, maybe 150 yards downslope. The voice sounded like a man in his 30s or 40s, not panicked, but strained, like someone who'd been calling for a while and was conserving energy. I reached for my radio. Then I stopped. Rule number 2. If a hiker reports hearing someone calling for help in the western hollows after sundown, file a report. Do not investigate. It wasn't after sundown. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. Bright daylight. And I wasn't hearing a report. I was hearing the voice myself, in real time, from a direction where a real person could plausibly be injured. But the voice was coming from the west, and something about it made the hair on my forearms stand up in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I listened. The man called out again. "Hello? I've hurt my leg. I'm by the creek. Can somebody help me?" Reasonable words, reasonable tone. And yet my body, the body that had been trained in combat zones to make threat assessments faster than my conscious mind could process, my body did not want to go toward that voice. Every nerve I had was firing the signal I learned to trust in Kunar province. Wrong. Something about the situation is wrong and you need to leave. I keyed my radio. "Dale, this is Andy on Rimrock at the 2-mile shelf. I've got an audible call for help from the western drainage. Male voice, claiming injury, requesting guidance." The radio was silent for 4 seconds. Then Dale's voice came back, and it was different, tighter, like a rope pulled taut. "Copy, Andy. Do not descend into the drainage. Mark your position. Return to station by the trail. Normal pace. Do you copy?" I copy. "Dale, the voice sounds real. It sounds like someone's actually hurt down there." "I know what it sounds like. Return to station. We'll discuss when you're back." I stood on that limestone shelf for another 30 seconds, listening. The voice called out a third time. "Please, I can see the trail from here. Just come down to the creek." And that was the detail that broke through. I can see the trail from here. I was standing on a shelf above a drainage that dropped 70 feet through dense hardwood forest and a tangle of mountain laurel so thick you couldn't see 10 feet into it, let alone 150 yards upslope to a trail. Nobody in that creek bottom could see me. Nobody down there could see the trail. The voice knew where I was because it could hear me, or because it knew the trail existed. But it was lying about being able to see it. And if it would lie about that, it would lie about everything else. I turned around and walked back to the station at a normal pace. The voice called out twice more behind me, growing fainter. The second time, it said my name. "Andy? Andy, don't leave me down here." I had not stated my name on the radio in a way that would carry into that drainage. Dale had used it, but Dale was transmitting from the station 2 miles east. The voice in the creek bottom should not have known my name. I walked. I did not run. I kept my hand on my radio and I walked the 3 miles back to the station with a heartbeat I could hear in my own skull, and I did not turn around, and I did not answer. When I got back, Dale was standing on the front porch. He had his jacket on and his keys in his hand, like he'd been ready to come get me. He looked at my face and said, "Sit down." We sat on the porch bench. Dale poured coffee from a thermos. It was bitter and lukewarm, and I drank it like it was medicine. Then he said, "Tell me what you heard." I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once. "It does that," he said. "Has for as long as anyone here can remember. The calls for help, they started showing up in reports in the late 60s, before the trail closure. They were part of the reason it got closed, actually. 3 of the 7 missing hikers told companions they'd heard someone calling for help before they left the trail." "What is it?" Dale wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and stared at the tree line. The sun was getting low, maybe 45 minutes from setting, and the shadows under the canopy had deepened into something that looked less like shade and more like the forest had been replaced with a photograph of itself printed on darker paper. "I don't know," he said. "In 26 years, I don't know. I know what it does. I know some of what it can do. I don't know what it is." He looked at me. "And I've stopped needing to know. You'll get there too if you stick around." "It knew my name, Dale." "Yeah." He drank his coffee. "It does that too. Usually takes a few weeks before it starts using names. Took longer with me, almost 2 months. Got to yours fast." He paused. "It's been more active this spring than I've seen in years." That night, after Dale closed the western curtains and we ate soup in the glow of the overhead fluorescent, he told me about a man named Pete Garza. Pete had been Dale's partner at the station from 2004 to 2009. Good ranger. Former sheriff's deputy from Baxter County. Solid, practical, not the kind of man who spooked easy. In January 2008, Pete was running a patrol on the Stillwater Ridge Trail, north side well away from the hollows, when he heard a woman crying. Not calling for help, just crying. The way someone cries when they've stopped hoping anyone will come. Soft, broken, exhausted weeping. Pete called it in. Dale told him to mark it and come back. But the crying was coming from a direction where, according to Pete's GPS, there was nothing. No trail, no structure, no reason for anyone to be there. And it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Broad daylight, mild weather. Pete went toward the crying. Dale went quiet for a moment when he got to that part. He refilled his coffee mug from the pot on the stove, and I noticed his hands were steady. Not because he wasn't feeling anything, but because he'd told this story enough times that his body had learned to hold still through it. He was gone for 4 hours, Dale said. I went out looking for him at dark, which I should not have done, and I know that. Found him sitting in a clearing about a mile off the trail. Just sitting in the dirt with his legs out in front of him like a kid in a sandbox. He was facing west. His GPS said he was at a point that doesn't correspond to any clearing I've ever found on that ridge. When I pulled up the coordinates later on a proper map, they put him on a steep wooded slope. No clearing. But he was sitting in a clearing. Was he hurt? Not a scratch on him, but he was different, quieter. He stopped sleeping well, started staring out the western windows after dark, and not the way I close the curtains and move on with my evening. He'd stand there and look, for hours. Dale set his mug down. 3 weeks later, I woke up at 2 a.m. and Pete's bunk was empty. I found him outside, standing at the tree line, barefoot. February, 28 degrees. He was just standing there facing the dark, and he was whispering. I couldn't hear what he was saying. When I touched his shoulder, he turned around and looked at me like he didn't know who I was. Then it came back and he said, "Dale, I think it wants me to come back to the clearing." Dale transferred Pete out the following week, put in the request himself, called in favors, got Pete reassigned to a station in the Ouachita National Forest, 200 miles south. Pete went. He worked there for 4 months. Then he resigned from the Forest Service, moved to Dallas, and took a job selling insurance. I talked to him once after that, Dale said. Called him in 2011. He was polite, sounded normal. But when I asked if he ever thought about Bald Ridge, there was a silence on the line that lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "I hear it at night sometimes, Dale. Even here. I don't know if it's real or if it's in my head, and I've decided I don't want to know." We haven't spoken since. I lay in my bunk that night and listened to the forest. The spring peepers were out in the creek bottoms, thousands of them, a wall of sound so dense it felt physical. And underneath it, or maybe woven through it, I thought I heard something else. Not the radio breathing, not a voice, just a kind of pressure. Like the silence you hear when someone is standing outside your door, deciding whether to knock. I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes, and I did not go to the window. For the next several months, I followed the rules. I ran my patrols. I checked the trail cameras on the Stillwater grid every 2 weeks and replaced the SD cards. And I saw things on those cards that I filed in the red binder without discussion. Figures between the trees at 3 a.m., standing in postures that weren't quite right, legs too straight, arms at angles that looked calculated rather than natural. Sometimes just one figure, sometimes 3 or 4, standing in a line, all facing the camera. The images were always grainy. The cameras were motion-activated infrared, but the figures were always distinct enough that you couldn't pretend they were deer or shadows or lens artifacts. I never saw them on patrol. They were never there when I checked the locations, just on the cameras, just at night, just on the Stillwater grid, which was the grid closest to the old Hollow Trail route. Dale never looked at the images. He'd been looking at them for 26 years, and at some point, he'd stopped. "I know they're there," he said when I asked. "I don't need to see them to know. File them. That's what the binder's for." "Who reads the binder?" "Nobody reads the binder." "Then why do we keep it?" Dale looked at me with an expression I'd later come to understand was something close to tenderness, the look of a man watching someone ask a question he had asked himself a long time ago. Because the next person might need to see how long it's been going on. Evidence matters even when nobody's looking at it yet, especially then. I kept the binder. I filed the images, and every 2 weeks I'd sit in the back room with the new SD card spread on the desk, looking at timestamp after timestamp of figures in the dark, and I'd wonder how something could be so consistently present and so absolutely absent at the same time. They were always there on the cameras. They were never there in person. So, as if whatever stood in those woods at 3 a.m. existed in a version of the forest that only the cameras could see, or only existed when no human eye was watching. That thought kept me up more nights than I'd like to admit. The first year passed, then the second. I settled into the rhythm of Bald Ridge the way you settle into any difficult posting, not by getting comfortable, but by accepting that discomfort was the baseline. I followed the rules. I closed the western curtains. I didn't answer the radio between midnight and 4. I didn't go toward voices in the drainage, even when they called my name, even when they sounded hurt, even when one evening in late September, the voice in the hollow was a child's voice, small and frightened, and it said, "Mister, I'm lost, I can't find my mom." and I stood on the trail with my fists at my sides and my jaw clamped shut, and I walked back to the station and sat on the porch and stared at nothing for an hour. There was no missing child report. There had been no children on the trails that day. I checked. The voice was a tool, and the thing using it knew exactly which frequency to broadcast on. The frequency of a grown man who couldn't save a 6-year-old in the back of an ambulance 8 years ago, who carried that small, still weight in his arms for the rest of his life. It knew. Somehow, it knew about that. That was the night I stopped being a skeptic. Not because of the voice itself, I'd heard the voices before, but because the intelligence behind it had gone from knowing my name to knowing my wounds. It had found the thing I couldn't walk away from, and it had played it like a recording, piped it through the trees at exactly the distance where I could hear it clearly but couldn't see anyone, and it had waited to see what I would do. I didn't break, but I understood in a way I hadn't before that the rules weren't precautions. They were a seawall, and the water was always rising. By the start of this year, 2024, I'd been at Bald Ridge for 7 years. Dale had started talking about retirement, not eagerly the way most people do, reluctantly, the way a man talks about putting down a dog that's in pain. He didn't want to leave. He was afraid of what would happen to the station, to the rules, to the containment that he'd spent 26 years maintaining with nothing but a piece of yellow paper and his own stubbornness. But his body was giving out. His knees were shot. His blood pressure was controlled by 3 medications. He'd had a minor heart attack in 2022 that he told the district office was chest tightness from a pulled muscle. And I drove him to the hospital in Mountain Home at 2 a.m. and sat in the waiting room and thought about what would happen if Dale Coburn died, and I was alone at Bald Ridge with a lockbox full of unanswered questions and a forest that knew my name. Dale started training me the way he'd been trained, not through the manual, but through the oral tradition that ran parallel to it. He showed me the logbook from 1973, the sealed page, Bill Cotter's final entry, written in handwriting that started controlled and ended in something closer to a seismograph reading. I'll tell you what it said. I memorized it the first time I read it, and I've never forgotten a word. July 15th, 1973. Returned from Hollow Trail at 0340. Trail appears to continue beyond the map terminus. Do not know how far. Did not reach the end. Heard the voices at approximately mile 4. Saw the opening at mile 5. Did not enter. Whatever lives up there is patient. It sends them back when it's done with them, and it always sends them back for a reason. Closing the trail effective immediately. God help anyone who finds it after we've erased it. Recommend the station be staffed at all times. 2 rangers minimum. W. Cotter. I read that entry in March of this year. Dale was sitting across the desk from me, watching my face the way he'd watched it 7 years before in the truck. When I looked up, he said, "Now you know what I know. Bill Cotter saw something at mile 5. Yes? An opening. That's what he wrote. An opening to what?" Dale shook his head. Not refusal, just the limit of what he had. He never told anyone. He resigned the next day and drove to Tulsa and didn't stop until he got there. Whatever he saw at that opening, it was enough to end his career, and it wasn't enough to make him go in. I thought about that for a long time. An experienced ranger, a man who'd spent years in that forest, who'd climbed to mile 5 of a trail where 7 people had vanished, and he'd found an opening, and he hadn't entered it. Not because he was a coward, because he understood in whatever way a person can understand something like that going in would mean not coming out. Or worse, coming out changed. Like the hikers who went in and were never found, or like the one who came back last Tuesday. I need to tell you about last Tuesday. I need to be precise, because I've already started forgetting small details, and that scares me more than anything else that's happened. Things that should be burned into my memory are getting soft at the edges, like photographs left in the sun. I wrote everything down the morning it happened, and I'm reading from those notes now. Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. I was at the station alone. Dale had been on medical leave since September. His doctor pulled him off active duty after a blood pressure reading that apparently made the nurse leave the room to get a second opinion. I was running Bald Ridge solo, which the district office approved because they don't know what Bald Ridge actually is. To them, it's a low-traffic station in a low-priority forest. They have no idea. At 6:47 a.m., I know the exact time because I was logging my morning equipment check and I noted it. I heard footsteps on the access road. The old access road, the one that leads to the decommissioned trailhead. That road has been gated and chained since 1973. It's overgrown. You'd need a machete to walk it, or you'd need to come from the other direction, down from the ridge, through the forest, from the direction of the trail that isn't supposed to exist. I stepped out onto the porch and saw a man emerge from the tree line. He was walking slowly, not injured, slowly, carefully, like someone who hadn't walked on flat ground in a while and was remembering how. He was wearing a green canvas jacket, brown corduroy pants, and leather hiking boots, the old-fashioned kind with the red laces and the stacked leather sole. He had a canvas backpack with external frame, the kind nobody's carried since the 70s. There was a canteen clipped to his belt, metal, dented. He saw me and stopped. He stood there for a moment, about 30 yards away, and I could see his face clearly in the early morning light. He was a white male, mid-20s, brown hair, clean-shaven. He looked healthy, alert, rested even. His clothes were worn but not damaged. No tears, no heavy soiling. But there was a smell. It reached me even at 30 yards, carried on the morning air, and it was wrong. Wood smoke, yes, the kind you'd expect from someone who'd been camping. But underneath it, something metallic. Wet copper, like a handful of old pennies held under a faucet. Like blood, but not exactly blood. Older than blood. A smell that made some deep pre-verbal part of my brain want to step backward into the station and close the door. I did not step backward. I'm a park ranger. This was a person on federal land who might need help. "Sir," I said, "are you all right?" He looked at me. His eyes were clear, present. Not confused, not disoriented, but there was something behind them, a kind of patience that didn't match his face. Young face, old eyes. The kind of eyes I'd seen on Afghan elders who'd survived 3 wars and didn't bother being surprised by anything anymore. "What year is it?" he said. The question landed in my chest like a stone dropped in still water. "It's 2024, I said. "October 8th. He nodded, slowly. The way you'd nod if someone confirmed the weather forecast you'd already checked. "He told me it'd be a while," the man said. Then he walked toward me, calm as a churchgoer heading for the front pew, and sat down on the porch steps and set his backpack between his feet and looked out at the forest he'd just walked out of, like he was watching something I couldn't see. I radioed Dale. I know he was on medical leave. I know I was supposed to call the number on the back of the paper, but Dale picked up on the second ring, and when I told him what was happening, the line went quiet in a way I recognized. Not confusion, recognition. The silence of a man who'd been waiting 26 years for a phone call and had finally received it. "What's his name?" Dale said. I asked the man on the porch his name. "Thomas Caldwell," he said, calm, clear, like giving his name at a hotel check-in. I heard Dale's breathing change, then a sound I'd never heard from Dale Coburn in 7 years, a small, involuntary noise, somewhere between a laugh and a sob, then silence again. "Keep him there," Dale said. "Don't let him leave. I'm coming." "Dale, you're on medical—" "I'm coming. Andy. Thomas Caldwell was reported missing on July 14th, 1973. He was 24 years old. He went up the hollow trail and never came back." A pause. "If he's sitting on our porch, he should be 75. I looked at the man on the steps. 24. 25 at most. Smooth skin, full hair, strong hands gripping the straps of his backpack. Not a single year older than the day he'd presumably walked into the forest more than half a century ago. "He's not 75, Dale." "I know," Dale said. "That's what Bill Cotter meant. It sends them back when it's done with them." Another pause, longer this time. "Andy, listen to me. Do not let him leave the station, and after dark, don't let him near the western windows." Dale hung up. I stood on the porch with the radio in my hand and the morning light coming through the trees and Thomas Caldwell sitting on the steps smelling like wood smoke and wet copper. And I understood for the first time that the rules on that yellow piece of paper weren't enough. They never had been. They were the map of a country that kept drawing new borders, and we were always one step behind, and something had just walked out of the territory we didn't have a map for and sat down on our front porch and was watching the tree line with the expression of a man who knew exactly what was behind him and was waiting for it to follow. I brought Thomas inside, sat him at the desk, gave him water, which he drank slowly, like someone who hadn't forgotten how, but was relearning the pleasure of it. He held the tin cup with both hands and looked around the station with an expression I can only describe as archaeological, studying the fluorescent lights, the radio equipment, the solar panel inverter on the wall, the way you'd study artifacts in a museum. Things that were familiar enough to recognize, but wrong enough to notice. "They rebuilt the station," he said. "In 1988, the original burned." He nodded. "Lightning?" "Electrical fire, according to the report." Something crossed his face, not quite a smile. "According to the report," he repeated, and the way he said it told me he knew exactly how much weight the official reports carried at Bald Ridge. I followed Rule 5. I did not release him. I did not call 911. I sat across from him at the desk and I took out my notebook and I asked him what happened. Thomas Caldwell spoke for 47 minutes. I timed it because I was recording on my phone and because at some point during his account, my hand stopped being able to hold the pen steady enough to write. So I'll tell you what he told me. As close to his words as I can manage, he said he'd come to the Ozarks in the summer of 1973 with 2 friends from the University of Arkansas, where he was finishing a degree in forestry. They'd planned a 3-day backpacking trip on the Hollow Trail, which at the time was still open, still marked, still on the map. His friends had bailed the morning of. One had a stomach bug, the other didn't want to go without the first. Thomas went alone. He told them he'd be back by Wednesday. He reached the trailhead at 7 a.m. on July 14th. The trail was well maintained for the first 3 miles. Good signage, clear path, blazes on the trees. At mile 3, he said, the trail started to change. Not deteriorate, change. The blazes got older. The paint faded from white to gray to almost nothing. The trail itself narrowed but didn't disappear. It was still there, still walkable, but it felt like he was moving backward through the trail's history, walking into a version of the path that predated the Forest Service's involvement. At mile 4, he heard the voices. Multiple voices, coming from different directions, all calling for help. He said he stopped and listened for about 5 minutes, and during that time he counted at least 4 distinct voices, 2 men, a woman, and what sounded like a teenager, all calling from different points in the forest, all saying variations of the same thing. "Help me, I'm lost, I can't find the trail." He did not go toward them. He told me this with a kind of bewildered gratitude, like a man who'd made the right decision for the wrong reasons. "I didn't go because it didn't make sense," he said. 4 people lost in 4 different directions, all at the same time, all within earshot. That's not how people get lost. I figured it was some kind of echo effect, acoustics in the hollows. He kept walking. At mile 5, the trail ended. Not petered out, not faded into underbrush, ended. The path simply stopped at the edge of a clearing that Thomas said was perfectly circular, about 60 feet across, with no trees, no brush, no ground cover. Just bare earth, hard-packed and smooth like a clay tennis court. And at the center of the clearing, there was an opening. He described it carefully. He said it looked like a cave entrance, except it wasn't in a hillside or a bluff. It was in the ground. A dark opening, roughly oval, about 8 feet wide and 5 feet tall, angled slightly downward. The edges were smooth, not rough limestone or fractured rock, but smooth, the way river stones are smooth, as if something had been passing through that opening for so long it had worn the edges down to a polish. He walked to the edge of the opening and looked in. He said the darkness inside was not normal darkness. It didn't resolve when his eyes adjusted. It was absolute, and it was warm. He could feel heat rising from it, and the heat carried a smell. The same smell I'd noticed when he first walked out of the forest. Wood smoke and wet copper. And something else underneath. Something he said he'd never encountered before or since. A sweetness, not floral, not chemical, organic, like overripe fruit, or like the smell of a wound that's been kept too clean. Antiseptic sweetness covering something that shouldn't be sweet. Thomas said he stood at the edge for about 30 seconds. He said he was not afraid. He said that was the part that frightened him most, telling it back to me, that he should have been afraid, that every rational instinct should have been screaming at him to turn around, and instead, he felt calm. Welcome. Like the opening was something he'd been walking toward his whole life and had finally found. He stepped in. I asked him what was inside. He went quiet for a long time. His hands tightened on the cup. Then he said something that I've been turning over in my mind every waking moment since. It was a place, not a cave. A place. It had sky, except the sky was wrong, too low, and the light came from everywhere at once, so nothing cast shadows. There were trees, but they weren't right. They looked like someone had described trees to something that had never seen one, and it had done its best. Close enough to recognize, wrong enough that your brain wouldn't stop screaming. He said there were people there, standing among the not-quite trees, dozens of them. Men, women, a few children. They were dressed in clothes from different decades. He saw buckskin, he saw denim, he saw a woman in a dress that looked Victorian. They were all standing still, facing him, and they were all smiling. Not smiling like people smile, he said. Smiling like they'd been told to smile, like something was wearing their faces and had learned what a smile looked like but not what it meant. He said he tried to turn around, and the opening was gone. Just ground behind him, the same hard-packed earth. No way out, no way back. I asked him how long he was in there. It felt like a week, he said. Maybe 2. The light never changed. There was no night. I walked. I looked for the opening. The people followed me, but they never got closer. They just stayed at the same distance, like the gap between us was fixed. And the whole time, something was watching. Not the people, something else. Something that used the people the way a man uses tools. I never saw it. I felt it. It was interested in me. It was learning me, going through me like someone flipping through a filing cabinet. He touched his temple when he said that, unconsciously, the way you'd touch a bruise. Then it was done. I don't know how else to say it. It found what it wanted, or it finished looking, and a light opened up in the ground, and I could smell pine trees and morning air, and I walked through it, and I was on the access road. 51 years later, I said. Thomas looked at me, those old eyes and that young face. 51 years for you, he said. For me, it felt like maybe 10 days. He paused, set the cup down. It let me go because it wanted me to come back here. I know that. It didn't tell me that in words, but I know it the way you know your own name. It put something in me. A message, maybe. Or a door. He looked toward the western windows. The curtains were open. It was still morning. It's been sending people in for a very long time. I think it sends some of them back. The ones it wants to use is, I don't know, invitations, proof of concept. Look, it's harmless. He came back fine. He looked at his hands. I did come back fine. I feel fine. But I know something is different. Something behind my eyes. Like a window that wasn't there before, and something on the other side of it is looking through. That was when Dale arrived. He'd driven 40 miles on a suspended license with blood pressure that could have felled a horse, and he walked through the door looking worse than I'd ever seen him, gray-faced, breathing hard, one hand on the doorframe for support. But his eyes were clear. And when he saw Thomas Caldwell sitting at the desk, young and calm and smelling like the inside of that opening, Dale's face did something I'd never seen it do. It crumbled, just for a second. 26 years of composure, of checking his watch and closing the curtains and filing images in the red binder, and never, not once, letting the weight of what he carried show on his face. It all broke at once, like a dam giving way, and for 1 second I saw the man underneath, the man who was tired, the man who had been holding a line alone in the dark for most of his adult life, and had just seen proof that the thing on the other side of that line was not content to stay there. Then he pulled himself together, sat down, looked at Thomas, said, "Son, I need to know, did it follow you out?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He turned his head toward the western windows again. The morning light was pouring through them, warm and golden, catching dust motes in the air. Everything outside was still. No wind, no birdsong, no birdsong. At 8 a.m. in October in the Ozarks, there should have been a symphony. Jays, cardinals, wrens, woodpeckers. I heard nothing. The forest was silent, and the silence had a texture to it, a weight, like the air itself was holding its breath. Thomas looked back at Dale. "I don't think it followed me out," he said. "I think it was already here. I think it's been here the whole time, and the opening is just where it's closest to the surface. It doesn't need to follow anyone. It just needs to wait." Dale looked at me. I looked at Dale. And in that look, something passed between us that I don't think either of us could have put into words. An understanding that the rules, the yellow paper, the red binder, the curtains, the time restrictions, all of it, it was maintenance on a levee that was already breached. We weren't containing anything. We were living on the edge of something that had its own schedule, its own patience, and its own plans. And we had been flattering ourselves for 50 years that a list of rules on legal paper was holding it at bay. It wasn't. The rules kept us alive. They didn't keep it contained. Those were two very different things, and I hadn't understood the difference until that morning. Thomas stayed at the station for 3 days. I slept in shifts. Dale stayed despite his medical condition, and we kept Thomas in the main room, away from the western windows, and we watched him the way you watch a patient in post-op, carefully, constantly looking for signs of change. On the second night, I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of Thomas talking in his sleep. He was lying on the bunk with his eyes closed, speaking in a low, steady voice, and the words weren't English. They weren't any language I recognized. They were rhythmic, almost musical, and they were coming from his mouth, but they weren't his. The cadence was wrong. The breathing pattern was wrong. He was speaking on the exhale and the inhale, producing a continuous stream of sound that a human throat shouldn't be able to make. I sat in the dark and listened for 11 minutes. Then it stopped. Thomas rolled over. His breathing normalized. In the morning, he said he'd slept fine and didn't remember dreaming. I didn't tell him. I told Dale. Dale added an 8th rule to the yellow paper that afternoon, in his own handwriting, pressing hard enough that the pen nearly tore through. 8. If a returned person speaks in their sleep, do not wake them. Do not record the speech. Note the time and duration only. If the speech continues for more than 30 minutes, leave the building and wait at the vehicle until it stops. On the 3rd day, the number on the back of the paper finally answered. 2 men arrived in an unmarked truck. No uniforms, no badges, no identification beyond a phone call to Dale that used a code phrase I'd never heard. They were polite, efficient, and absolutely uninterested in explaining who they were. They examined Thomas. They took his backpack. They asked me for my phone, listened to the recording of his account, transferred the file to a device I didn't recognize, and deleted it from my phone. They told Thomas he'd be taken to a facility for observation and that his family, what remained of it, would be contacted. Thomas went with them willingly. At the door, he turned back and looked at me. "The opening is still there," he said. "Mile 5. It's not going to close on its own." Then he paused, and something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker, like a second image projected over the first, and he said, "It knows about you, Andy. It knows about the ambulance, the boy. It's been saving that." His voice changed on those last 3 words, dropped half an octave, flattened out, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Then he blinked, and the flicker was gone, and he looked confused, as if he'd lost his place in a conversation, and the 2 men walked him to the truck and drove him away, and I haven't heard anything since. Dale left a week later. Official medical retirement, 26 years and 4 months. He handed me the key to the lockbox on a cord, and I put it around my neck, and it's there now, resting against my sternum, warm from my body heat. He shook my hand on the porch and held it for a long time and said, "The binder's getting full. I left a new one in the supply closet." He drove away. I stood on the porch and watched his truck until it disappeared around the bend in the logging road, and then I went inside and closed the western curtains even though it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I sat at the desk and I read every page in the red binder from front to back, and I counted the figures in the trail camera photos. I counted them for every month since 2004 when the binder started. I made a chart. In 2004, the cameras captured an average of 2 figures per month. By 2010, it was 4. By 2018, it was 7. Last month, September 2024. The cameras captured 19 distinct figures across 12 nights. The line on my chart does not curve. It does not plateau. It goes up. Steady, patient, consistent, like something keeping pace with a schedule only it can see. And the locations are spreading. In 2004, the figures appeared only on the still water grid, closest to the old hollow trail. By 2015, they'd been captured on cameras a mile further east. This year, I found one on a camera near the Rimrock Loop trailhead, 2 miles from the station, 2 miles from the parking area where families unload minivans on Saturday mornings and children run ahead on the trail and sometimes, for just a moment, disappear around a bend. I have a new ranger arriving next month. Her name is Sarah Chen. She's 29, former wildland firefighter, 2 seasons on a hotshot crew in Montana. She's tough and smart, and she applied to Bald Ridge because she wanted a quiet posting after 2 bad fire seasons. She has no idea. I've been rewriting the rules. The yellow paper is too fragile. The creases are tearing. The pencil entries are almost gone. I'm transferring everything to a new sheet. Same yellow legal paper, same format, but I'm adding entries. Rule 8, which Dale wrote, and Rule 9, which I wrote this morning, 9. If a returned person references specific personal information about you that they should not know, information you have not shared with anyone at the station, do not respond to the content of what they've said. End the conversation. Leave the room. Note the time, the words used, and whether the person's voice changed during delivery. The person may not be aware of what they've said. The thing that said it is. I'll sit with Sarah on the porch bench. I'll hand her the paper. I'll watch her face go through the same stages mine did. Amusement, confusion, skepticism, the slow dawning realization that the man handing her these rules is not joking, is not hazing her, has not lost his mind. And when she asks me why the trail was closed in 1973, I'll tell her. And when she asks what's in the forest, I'll tell her what Dale told me. I don't know, but I know what it does. Last night, the radio picked up the breathing again. Long, slow, patient. I sat in the dark and listened to it for 20 minutes. And then, just before it stopped, the breathing shaped itself into a word. One word, barely audible, pressed into the static like a thumbprint in wet clay. Andy. I turned off the radio. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. If you're planning a trip to the Ozarks, St. Francis National Forest, I want you to go. It's beautiful country. Hike the marked trails, camp in the designated areas, watch the sunset from the bluffs and listen to the whippoorwills and let the forest give you what it gives everyone. Peace and quiet and the feeling of being small in a world that's bigger and older than you. But stay on the marked trails. Don't hike after dark. And if you hear someone calling for help from a direction where the map shows nothing, where the trail lines stop and the contour lines bunch together and there's just a blank space that the cartographer left empty, keep walking. Don't answer. The forest has enough voices already. It doesn't need yours.